When I was in high school, I read some book that we got assigned that was about this Native American tribe called the Machaguengas. And there was this one random bit that I remember sort of sticking out to me that I wanted to talk about. There was this little passage where it talks about, oh, this tribe, they have some myth. The moon is like a fruit. It's just part of their sort of mythological world. Um, and then they made a point that, and is that really any more valid or any less valid than the scientific Western worldview? And I remember at the time just being sort of outraged that, like, yes, it's much less valid. We have actual knowledge about the moon. It's not a fruit in any sense. That they are incorrect about this. We don't know everything about this, but have some level of knowledge. Uh, and I couldn't even see what they were going for with that. Like, in what sense could you be imagining? It's the most ridiculous extremity of like postmodernism to be saying, oh, maybe the moon is a fruit. What's the difference between that and science? Um, but so what I think I've come to on this is that the different ways of looking at the world, sort of different frameworks for viewing it, and it's just about the usefulness of them rather than the sort of literal accuracy. And that the idea of literal accuracy is almost sort of a weird idea that doesn't really make that much sense. When you talk about some way that you're modeling the world, um, like an economic model, laws of supply and demand, or what have you, uh, is that literally accurate? It is a real pattern that you've seen in the world. There's something going on there. There's some correspondence between reality and what you're saying. But it's not necessarily, any factual thing. It's just kind of something that you can imagine that helps you deal with this reality. Um, and I think that the great comparison is just the idea that your knowledge is a map, and then the reality is the actual physical territory. And of course, this is something that you see a lot in like the rationalist community. The map is not the territory; is this key knowledge. Your understanding of something is not the same as that actual thing. And then that idea can expand a little when you think about the fact that there are very different ways that you can map the same territory. If I have some old timey map that has like a sea monster drawn in some area of the ocean, I'm pretty sure that the people making that map were not implying, oh yeah, there's this giant sea monster that's the size of a continent that's over there in that ocean. It's just sort of a flourish, and maybe it's giving you the information that like here there be monsters. Like, yeah, I don't know what the hell is going on over in this area. Maybe there are monsters over there. If they thought of it as some weird detailed medieval sea monster, but hey, whales and sharks and giant squid and whatever are plenty monstrous enough for me. Um, and so it's this little bit more metaphorical way of looking at that map, but it's not necessarily wrong. And then there are even ways that forget metaphors, but are just like, oh, this is a topographical map. This gives the height and or depth of each point on land. This one's a population density map. It shows you how many people live in that area. This one is a road map. This one is a subway map that's compressed so that we can fit all the lines in. There are different maps. Some of them are more accurate in the sense of being more of a literally what this territory looks like. Like if you're looking down on it from a satellite, you have satellite maps. That's another option. But in terms of the actual usefulness of it as a map, it just depends on what you're going for. So I bet that in a lot of ways, the Machaguenga mythological way of looking at the world is a more useful worldview for them than sort of a Western rationalist scientific worldview in terms of staying alive as some hunter-gatherer tribe in Peru, I want to say is where they were. um, And so of course you can improve. I bet there are some things that science has discovered that would be handy in that situation. But then a lot of things that they're saying, you could figure out the same stuff maybe if you applied science to the problem of, oh, what's the most efficient way to live in this environment? But you'd have to do that. You can't just drop me there and be like, oh, we'll do some science and and you'll figure it out. The easier way to do it is to ask these people that are already there, how do you view this? What's the best way to deal with these situations that you're finding yourselves in? And then copy them and then see how it works and get it done. Um, and so yeah, it's made me much more accepting of sort of other types of knowledge, and I still am really in favor of the sort of systematizing, logical, scientific outlook, mainly because that's capable of improvement in a way that these sort of more mythological, where it's just, oh, we do it this way because it's always worked that way, or not. Um, but you can't just throw those away. And there are a lot of situations where the things that we can prove scientifically don't necessarily point in the right direction. And we can see that so well just looking at the past. I'm not necessarily going to make any claims about, oh, the science on this issue is bullshit. But man, it was recently that medicine became better than useless, wasn't it? Um, I've heard maybe early 1900s, something like that. That if you go much before that, you're kind of better off with a witch doctor or just nothing. These groups like Christian Scientists and whatnot, whose whole thing or part of their thing was, oh, we don't go to the doctor, we don't use Western medicine. Now that seems sort of crazy, but 150 years ago, I would say that's a big money saver and probably going to make you healthier than if you used conventional medicine. Um, and I think that people who were into conventional medicine thought it was bullshit back then and just were wrong. So it's tough to say where we need to be paying more attention to our, deep mythological ideas as opposed to what science tells us. But I think that the practical message is just look at what works. And even if you don't necessarily understand what is going on with some framework of knowledge or why someone believes something, if acting based on that seems to work, seems to do what you need it to do, don't just dismiss it out of hand. There's a great possibility that, yep, there's some reason that it's effective, and we don't necessarily understand what that reason is right now, but we'll see it someday. And this also sort of feeds into the way for science to address this kind of thing is to be very empirical. Don't worry so much about, oh, you have to be able to explain everything based on some all-encompassing theory, but much more just, oh, when we do this, this happens. Just a nice, simple cause and effect, see what works type of attitude. A little more engineering than science, maybe. There's a lot of room for theory, but for most practical questions, just the empirical, very, close to what's happening kind of thing is what's ideal. So yeah, be accepting of other people's frameworks of looking at the world, try to figure them out, try to still do science on them, because let's be real, science is still better. It's just not the only possible map. We have got a lot of maps lying around here. There's the one that you use most of the time, Google Street Maps, perhaps. But there are other possibilities. Sometimes you need to know something different. Sometimes there's a different way of knowing that thing. So yeah, that's just a little personal growth maybe on my part, or devolution if you think that this is inappropriate. But yeah, I'd recommend that. I don't know what that book about the Machaguengos was. I'm sure if you look it up, you can figure it out. Anyway, thanks for tuning in. Peace.